Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan. On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Lately, I've been noticing a wave of people who are joining our product success labs or workshops, or folks sliding into our DMs who all have a side project that they made with AI. What's interesting about a lot of these folks is that many of them are not technical, they're not product folks or engineers. They're lawyers, hedge fund managers, business owners, manufacturers. And a lot of folks, excitingly, have caught the vibe coding bug. It is super thrilling. Tools are turning our imagination into working software. And somewhere between the first prototype and a real product, let alone a profitable business, things are also starting to get messy. And I think this is because hobbies are starting to masquerade as viable startup options. On this episode, we're going to talk about the fast fashion era of software. Why I think it's amazing for us all, but also dangerous for folks who are confusing joy of building with the traction that's required to build a real business. I'll share a few stories, including my own, and 5 lessons to help you decide whether this is a hobby or a business worth betting on, and how to progress from a hobby into a business. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Welcome back to Convergence.fm, folks. We've been noticing a wave of people walking in with AI-powered side projects, and they call them their little experiments, but their eyes really light up when they talk to us about them. There was a hedge fund manager, and she showed me a workflow tool and dashboard that she built on Replit. We also got to talk to a manufacturer who hacked together a dashboard that can help them predict downtime on their machines, and also an M&A lawyer that automated document management for a very specific use case. The interesting thing here is that none of these folks are engineers by trade. Yet here they are spending countless hours building software. Honestly, this is beautiful. It actually takes me back to engineering school, where some of my favorite professors would really encourage us during the labs not to worry about our grades and just to play and have fun. We didn't necessarily take a lot of that advice. Another thing it reminds me of is like the garages in Silicon Valley from the 1970s, from that Steve Jobs movie. You had people soldering circuit boards and swapping parts out and figuring out how video games like Pong worked. I think vibe coding has really brought about that same jam session energy that I really miss from back then. Something deeper, of course, is happening here too. For the first time, we're seeing this level of which software creation is so much more democratic. People who once thought, I could never do that, but I wish there was a tool that did, or I wish I knew how to code, but I can't afford a coding boot camp, let alone going to university for it, have software accessible to them now to build software that solves problems for them. People have called it similar to the spread of literacy after the printing press, where suddenly everyone can read, and I think this is similar, where suddenly everyone can build. I think that's really good for all of us, where it opens the door for anyone to prototype an idea, visualize a product, or even ideate a business, maybe even solve a problem at home without waiting for a developer. Tools like Lovable, Replit, Cursor are raising a ton of investment money with multi-billion-dollar valuations for essentially lowering the barrier to bringing our imagination to life. Now, I'll admit, I'm personally invested in this too. I've built a number of these vibe-coded apps. And most recently at home, I've even included my family where we're building an app for ourselves that helps us declutter. We use it around the house. We're having a lot of fun with both building and using it. And here's something I've realized. As fun as it is to build, it's also dangerously easy to slide from being a hobby into something that's a hustle without noticing. And that's essentially what I want to talk about today. There's a phrase now going around called the fast fashion era of apps. I'm not sure who coined it. I found out about it when the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, tweeted about how we're entering this era. And I think he's right. Software is being ideated, shipped, and even discarded faster than ever, just like maybe how we buy clothes from H&M or Zara. AI is now the sewing machine of this era, and anyone can spin up an app overnight. And the trade-off might be the same as fast fashion, where we're trading off between speed and trendiness over sustainable durability, or novelty over sustainable depth. The world could soon be flooded with disposable apps, trendy and short-lived. And I think that's perfectly okay, especially maybe more so for software than fashion, one can argue, especially if you know what's going on and how you're getting a return on the time, energy, and even money that you're putting into this stuff. The challenge that I keep seeing is rooted in the fact that vibe coding is extremely addictive. You get that dopamine hit from seeing your idea come alive on a screen or see AI do something that you could previously even have a hard time describing. And folks are spending a disproportionate amount of time polishing up and perfecting their prototypes for customers that they haven't had a single conversation with or even have an idea of how they're going to get in front of these customers. And I think a hobby is great because it keeps you curious. It helps you learn a very important new skill that I think is going to be very valuable in the future. But hobbies don't automatically turn into companies. There were a number of people in a number of garages, I imagine, in the 1970s. Very few of them became viable businesses, and only one of them became Apple. There's a big difference between a hobby and a business. And I think a lot of it comes down to who you're solving this problem for, what problem you're solving, and ultimately what you're willing to invest in it. If you're spending your evenings building instead of marketing or selling, or polishing instead of validating, I have made this episode for you based on the numerous conversations we find ourselves in. Where to get started? I think it's the first decision is around intention. Is this a hobby or is this a venture? Am I building this as a delightful, super fun side project? Or am I building a company that I'm looking for a return financially someday? If it's a hobby, that's perfect. Just treat it like one. Protect your time. Build something that's in a space that you're already passionate about, something that delights you or your family or your colleagues, and that's enough. Recently, our family, we built this decluttering app. It helps us out right away. I don't need to think about total adjustable market. I just need peace of mind and less clutter and having fun with my family. On the other hand, if you find yourself skipping dinner to fix one more bug, maybe pause and ask yourself what game you're actually playing. Because turning a hobby into a business requires a very different mindset and one that's grounded in product thinking. And I've looked at the conversations we recently had, and there are 5 of them that tend to stick out a lot. So here are 5 things to think about for turning your hobby into a business, or at least figuring out which one you're in. The first one is thinking outside of the code and the technical product itself. We found that all of these vibe coders have overinvested in building product and underinvested in customer discovery. So before you build more, think about how people are going to find you, whether they're already looking for you, what they'd be willing to pay. The digitally savvy crowd today still discovers new tools and products on Twitter, on Reddit, on TikTok, and websites like Hacker News and Product Hunt. So spend a weekend searching for your idea there or wherever you think your customers would be looking for things. Figure out who else might already be solving it and what kind of reactions they're getting. Competition, of course, is not bad here. In fact, if you find no competitors or no one else solving this problem, that's usually a bigger red flag. I would say another thing to do is just write about this in language that you'd understand. Don't over MBA it. Just spend 20 minutes writing out for yourself a product brief. I found that 20 minutes is just as good as 2 hours oftentimes. And you can refine the language and add the MBA speak later if you need to raise money or speak with MBA folks for some reason. An example of an app that I love here in this fast fashion era is one called Room GPT. They built it in just 7 days, and basically the user uploads a photo of their room, and then it redesigns that room depending on whatever interior design style you have, or you want, like mid-century modern or contemporary or whatever. They built it in just 7 days, and then it was apparently making $25,000 a month. Sustaining this revenue is another story, and I don't know how well they're doing because competitors very quickly pop up overnight and have better distribution than you do. For example, the app Redfin for real estate allows you to redesign any of the pictures in their real estate app using these designs. So it's hard to know how long Room GPT will be able to sustain that revenue. The second thing is customer discovery. It's an unglamorous part, but I think it's one of the things, again, that separates the hobbyists from the builders in a way that you can go from hobby to business. There's a real danger here because you can easily, myself included, mistake that joy that comes from building with the discipline that's required for learning. So before you sprint ahead and ask more and build more, sit down and ask yourself, who has this problem that's painful enough to pay me for it? When you get to talk to them, if you do, which I highly recommend you do, think about things like the book Mom Test would suggest. Like, don't pitch them. Ask them questions about how they go about solving the problem today that cannot be answered with polite lies. Find out how they describe the problem, how often they encounter it, what they currently do about it, when this problem came about. And if they shrug or you find them kind of being polite, move on. On the other hand, if they lean in and they feel heard and seen because you're talking about something that's a big problem for them, that's real signal to prioritize. Remember also that the goal isn't validation, it's falsification. You're looking for reasons that you might be wrong. This is where I think jobs to be done also helps. If you already have some users either using your product or a competitive product, because ultimately customers don't buy products, they hire those products to get jobs done. And vibe coding puts us at further risk because it's so easy to imagine features and avoiding the real question of what job this prototype is being hired for. I think this question will save you months of unnecessary coding and refactoring and everything else if you can get closer to the answer early. Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. The third idea is starting with the problem that you personally feel. Scratch your own itch, if you will. Building for yourself gives you instant access to feedback and allows you to test your own product with many iterations. You're your own first customer. And that's, by the way, how Intuit and TurboTax started. The founder saw his wife struggling with receipts and taxes. And solving that one domestic frustration, I've heard, grew eventually into the multi-billion-dollar company that we know it to be. So don't dismiss the small personal use cases. It's a great area where you can start small, start now, and start with yourself, like I've always talked about. Even if this first version only helps 4 other people, you'll learn so much about the mechanics of distribution, onboarding new customers, building trust and earning them coming back to use your product over and over and over again. The next idea is build, measure, learn, as Eric Ries talks about in the book Lean Startup. Every build can be a hypothesis if you apply this mindset. Ask, if I add this feature, what will a user do and by how much? And measure if they did that thing and by how much. And if it didn't meet that hypothesis, then you learn and you adjust. I want to be careful that building and skipping the measure and learn step is a critical thing that separates the hobbyist from the business builder. And it's like maybe baking a cake without tasting it and then baking another cake or baking more cakes. Incidentally, about cake, there's a timeless story about Betty Crocker that I think ties a lot of this customer discovery stuff together. When the first version of the instant cake mix was launched, sales lagged. Turns out it's because it was too easy, and that led their customers to feel detached. So they added an extra step, believe it or not, of having to crack one fresh egg into their recipe, and sales soared. It is so counterintuitive, and it was ultimately customer research that helped them arrive at this instinct, or this insight rather, that really changed the difference between a failed product versus one that made such a huge difference that we know about it as a household name years later, decades later. The last one is number 5, and it's around road mapping and prioritization. It's a complex term maybe, but really just list everything that you want to do and all the things that you could solve. And then ultimately prioritize them ruthlessly based on what you've learned and what your instincts are. This kind of roadmap of what to do first and what problems to solve first and what problems to wait till later really helps speed you up counterintuitively and helps you maintain speed later too. For example, in our decluttering app, we limited the first versions to photos. I wanted video, and I knew that adding it early would slow our learning down and my family would get bored because we didn't get to use the app early. But at the same time, we designed the database to allow for video later without committing to it now. So when we added video later on, it was really fast to do so. But at the same time, we got to go out and ship a version that was just photos and learn so much more. And frankly, like, video wasn't the next thing we built. We solved a bunch of other stuff before we got to the video thing that we could have spent another day solving if we wanted to. Now, in addition to these 5 tips, I feel like I'd be amiss if we didn't talk about security. Before you bring your customers in and have them save especially sensitive data in your app, run a quick security check. Even if you're non-technical, just use a different AI model to audit the architecture and security of your app. So if you used one of the vibe coding apps, do an export, put it into Claude or ChatGPT, and give you some things that the initial app may have missed. It's a small step, and it allows you to really understand how secure or not your app is. Things like database encryption are really standard today, but at the same time could be skipped depending on how you're building these apps. And then they could lead to a ton of downstream issues. So be careful of that. Another thing that I want you to think about, in addition to security and privacy, is how we oftentimes talk about customer first, then problem, and then solution. And I want to clarify, this is not linear sequencing. You're going to be doing MVPs of each of these as you go back and forth and bounce between them constantly. That's very normal, and you're going to learn instincts along the way. What matters is that you know which of them and you're solving for, whether it's the customer base, the problem that you're solving, or how you go about the solution. And don't confuse tinkering with the solution with the real work of learning, which oftentimes can happen in those first 2 buckets. So for all you vibe coders out there, congratulations. It is hard to get over that initial hump, and I'm glad that you have. And here is my invitation, is to form an honest opinion about what you are doing and being intentional. Is it a hobby that's play and brings you joy? Or is it a venture that warrants more of your time, energy, and even your money? If it's a hobby, that's perfect. Do it in a space that you're really passionate about. Have the most fun. Do it with your friends. Teach your kids how to do it and really enjoy the play. But if you're serious about turning it into a business and you're going to be having trade-offs around your time and money with it, think beyond the code. Think about who it's for, what problem it solves for them, where they hang out, how they describe the plane. And whether you are willing to deal with the rejection that comes with real discovery. Something that helps here is that build, measure, learn feedback loop from Lean Startup, as well as creating a roadmap where you prioritize what matters, focus on that, and let go of what doesn't. And remember that every no and every rejection brings you closer to the truth. So develop that muscle memory of rejection navigation. It might be a more valuable skill to you than the value that this app can bring itself. So thank you so much for hearing me out here. I hope that this is encouraging of vibe coding versus discouraging, and that if anything, it gives you some level of intentionality and a framework to think about it so that you can start out with hobbies and eventually build multi-billion-dollar businesses, and someday maybe credit hearing how to do that on Convergence. We will be back next week, as always, with another episode on building delightful products and fostering the engaged teams behind them. If you've got an idea that you've vibe coded or want a soundboard on what next, hit us up on social media DMs or on our website, convergence.fm, and the contact page. And we would love to hear from you and get in touch with you and get to hear you out and maybe do a workshop someday. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.